Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why a man who clearly desires you still doesn't reach out? Why he stays silent even when his heart is screaming for you? Today, we're going to break this mystery down into 3 powerful reasons. Fear of rejection and vulnerability is one of the most powerful forces that can hold a man back from reaching out, even when he deeply craves a woman. It may seem confusing. If he wants to talk to you, why doesn't he? If he thinks about you all the time, why does he stay silent? The truth is, fear can override even the strongest desires, and for many men, the idea of exposing their emotions feels far riskier than simply staying quiet. Rejection is painful for anyone, but for men, societal expectations have conditioned them to see rejection as not just a personal setback, but a blow to their masculinity. From a young age, many men are taught to suppress emotions, toughen up, and never show weakness. Expressing feelings, especially towards someone they truly care about, can feel like stepping onto a battlefield without armor. If he reaches out and gets ignored, or worse, receives a cold response, it can reinforce his deepest fear, that he is not enough. To avoid this possible outcome, he convinces himself that staying silent is safer. Another factor that plays into this fear is past experiences. If he has been rejected before, whether by you or someone else, that pain lingers. Our minds are wired to protect us from situations that have caused us harm in the past, and rejection leaves a lasting mark. Even if the situation with you is different, his subconscious may replay past moments where he was vulnerable and got hurt. He may remember the time he poured his heart out to someone who didn't feel the same way, or reached out to a woman who never responded. These experiences create an internal defense mechanism. Better to stay quiet than to risk facing that pain again. Additionally, the fear of vulnerability extends beyond just rejection. Opening up and expressing emotions requires a level of self-exposure that many men are uncomfortable with. It's one thing to desire someone in silence. It's another to admit it out loud. Vulnerability requires trust, and if he isn't certain how you feel about him, the idea of being emotionally exposed without a guarantee of reciprocity is terrifying. Many men would rather keep their emotions buried than risk feeling exposed and unprotected. This is especially true if he sees you as someone who has the power to truly hurt him. There's also the fear of losing control. When a man reaches out and expresses his emotions, he gives up a level of control over the situation. Suddenly, he's no longer just thinking about you in private. He's taken action, and now he's waiting for a response. That uncertainty can be excruciating. The moment he sends a message, he hands over the power to you. Will you reply immediately? Will you ignore him? Will you respond with the same level of enthusiasm, or just a polite acknowledgement? The not knowing can be unbearable for someone who values emotional control. Sometimes, he convinces himself that by staying silent, he maintains some level of power. He tells himself, if she wants to talk to me, she'll reach out. It becomes a game of emotional self-preservation. He may check his phone 100 times hoping for a message from you, but he won't send one himself because that would mean surrendering to his feelings, pandering to his feelings. This inner battle can be exhausting, but it's also a way for him to avoid the potential pain of reaching out and getting nothing in return. Then there's the fear of looking weak. Society often equates emotional expression with weakness, especially for men. If he reaches out first, will you see him as desperate? Will you think he's too needy? Will you lose respect for him? These thoughts may seem irrational to an outsider, but for someone caught in the grip of fear, they feel completely real. So, he doesn't want to be the one who cares more, who tries harder, who appears vulnerable while you seem indifferent. So instead of risking that perception, he does nothing. It's important to understand that this fear isn't necessarily a reflection of how much he wants you. He wants you. You might be on his mind every single day, but that fear creates a wall he struggles to break through. He might type out messages and delete them before sending. He might stare at your profile, wondering if you're thinking about him too. How about him too? But every time he considers reaching out, the doubts creep in. What if she's moved on? What if she doesn't care anymore? What if I'm making a fool of myself? These questions paralyze him, making inaction feel like the safer choice. Of course, this fear doesn't apply to all men. Some have the confidence to push past it, to take risks regardless of the outcome. But for those who struggle with fear of rejection and vulnerability, silence isn't about not wanting to reach out. It's about being too afraid of what might happen if they do. It's a tragic irony because often the very thing they fear, rejection, only happens because they didn't take action. The woman they crave might be waiting for them to make the first move, but instead both end up in a painful stalemate, longing for each other but never bridging the gap. Understanding this fear can help shift your perspective. If he hasn't contacted you, it might not mean he doesn't care. It might mean he cares too much, but he's afraid of what that means. The real question is, do you wait for him to overcome that fear? Or do you move forward with someone who isn't afraid to show you how much you mean to them? Ego and power dynamics play a crucial role in why a man might not reach out to you, even when he desperately craves you. It may seem illogical. If he wants to talk to you, why doesn't he just send a message or pick up the phone? The answer lies in a deeper psychological battle, one where pride, control, and perceived status often take precedence over raw emotions. Many men associate power with control, especially in relationships. The moment he reaches out, he may feel like he is relinquishing that control and putting himself in a vulnerable position. For some, this is terrifying. He might crave you, think about you constantly, and even check your social media multiple times a day. But the idea of being the one to make a move first can feel like a loss. He may convince himself that if he reaches out, he is placing himself in a lower position, showing that he needs you more than you need him. This internal struggle often stems from societal conditioning. From a young age, men are taught to be strong, independent, and emotionally reserved. They are told that being too eager, too emotional, or too available can be perceived as weakness. In a world that often values confidence and dominance, some men equate reaching out first with losing their edge. They fear that by taking the initiative, they might appear desperate, and desperation in their mind is unattractive. There is also the factor of status and social perception. In today's dating culture, many people engage in subtle power plays, whether they realize it or not. If a man believes he has the upper hand by remaining silent, he may intentionally hold back, waiting for you to be the one to chase him. He might assume that by not contacting you, he creates a sense of mystery, making you wonder about him, miss him, or even question whether he has moved on. This kind of strategy is sometimes used consciously, but more often it is a subconscious response to a world where being too available is sometimes perceived as a weakness. At the core of this struggle is ego. The male ego can be fragile, and for some men, admitting they want someone deeply feels like admitting defeat. Even if he craves you, he might resist the urge to reach out simply because he doesn't want to feel like he's giving in. He doesn't want to be the one who seems to care more. He might replay past conversations, analyze past interactions, and convince himself that if you truly wanted him, you would be the one to initiate. Instead of following his emotions, he leans on his pride, telling himself that staying silent gives him the upper hand. Another layer to this dynamic is the fear of appearing weak. Many men equate control with strength, and if he believes that reaching out will make him look weak or overly emotional, he will resist the urge, no matter how much he wants to talk to you. He may worry that if he contacts you too soon, he will appear needy, and in his mind, neediness is the opposite of attraction. Instead, he chooses to endure the discomfort of missing you in silence, believing that holding back maintains his position of power. This need for control can also be a defense mechanism. If he has been hurt before, he may have learned that expressing too much interest too soon leads to disappointment. He may have experienced situations where he showed his feelings, only to be met with rejection, disinterest, or emotional games. As a result, he now believes that withholding his emotions protects him from potential pain. By not reaching out, he convinces himself that he is in control of the situation, that he is not at risk of being hurt again. In some cases, a man might also be testing you. He may wonder if you will reach out first, if you will show that you care, or if you will prove that you miss him as much as he misses you. This kind of behavior is common among men who struggle with emotional security. Instead of taking the risk himself, he waits for you to make the move, using your response as validation. If you reach out, it reassures him that he is wanted. If you don't, he tells himself he was right to hold back, even if it causes him pain. For some men, silence is also a way of maintaining their sense of self-worth. If he believes that reaching out will lead to rejection or a lukewarm response, he would rather avoid the situation altogether. The ego does not like to be bruised, and sometimes the best way to protect it is to do nothing. Even if he wants to talk to you, the possibility of receiving anything less than the reaction he hopes for can stop him in his tracks. Power dynamics in relationships can also stem from previous experiences. If he has been in situations where showing too much interest led to being taken for granted, he may now overcorrect by holding back. He may think, last time I cared too much, I got hurt. This time, I'll be the one in control. Say, this time, I'll be the one in control. It's a way of rewriting the narrative of making sure he does not end up in a position where he feels powerless again. Ultimately, the battle between ego and emotions can be intense. Even when he desperately craves you, he may let his pride, his need for control, and his fear of appearing weak dictate his actions. He convinces himself that reaching out would be a loss, when in reality, it might be the very thing that could bring him happiness. The irony is that by holding back, he may actually lose the very connection he is trying to protect. Understanding these dynamics can help you see that his silence is not necessarily a reflection of how much he wants you. In many cases, it is a reflection of his internal struggle, a fight between the heart that wants to reach out and the ego that refuses to let him. The real question is, will he let his pride keep him from the connection he desires, or will he find the courage to put ego aside and take the risk? And more importantly, do you wait for him to make that choice, or do you choose someone who is unafraid to show you just how much you mean to them? One of the biggest reasons he never contacts you, even when he desperately craves you, is that he genuinely believes you've moved on. Whether this belief is based on reality or just his own assumptions, it can be a powerful mental block that prevents him from reaching out. Even if he misses you, thinks about you constantly, and wants nothing more than to reconnect, the fear that you've already left him behind can stop him from taking action. When a man believes you've moved on, he often convinces himself that reaching out is pointless. He assumes that if you wanted to talk to him, you would have done so already. He might think that your silence is proof that you no longer care, even if in reality, you're waiting for him to make the first move. This creates a frustrating cycle. He wants to reach out but tells himself you wouldn't be interested, so he holds back. Meanwhile, you might also be waiting for him to take action, creating a situation where both of you remain silent, even though you both still care. Social media can play a huge role in reinforcing his belief that you've moved on. If he sees you posting pictures where you look happy, spending time with friends, traveling, or even just living your life without any sign of missing him, he may assume that you're perfectly fine without him. Even if you're struggling with the breakup or the distance, people tend to show only the best parts of their lives online. He might be reading into every post, every like, and every caption, trying to determine whether you still think about him. If he sees something that suggests you're happy or possibly even dating someone new, he may decide that contacting you would be embarrassing or unwelcome. In some cases, he may have convinced himself that you were the one who wanted to end things, even if that's not entirely true. Sometimes, in an effort to protect his own feelings, a man will rewrite the past in a way that makes it easier to accept. If he believes that you were the one who walked away, then he might assume that you don't want to hear from him again. Even if he was the one who pulled away first, his mind might twist the situation so that he feels like the rejected one, making it harder for him to reach out. Another factor that plays into this belief is time. The longer you've been apart, the more likely he is to assume that you've moved on. In the early days after a breakup or a period of distance, he might still believe that there's a chance to reconnect. But as weeks or months pass, doubt starts to creep in. He begins to wonder if you've completely let go. If he doesn't hear from you during this time, he may take it as confirmation that you've moved forward without him, even if he still thinks about you daily. Men often struggle with rejection, and if he thinks you've moved on, reaching out might feel like setting himself up for humiliation. He doesn't want to send a message only to be met with indifference. He doesn't want to make a call only to hear a cold, distant voice on the other end. The thought of finding out that you no longer care might be more painful than staying silent and wondering. In his mind, the possibility of rejection is worse than the uncertainty of not knowing what could happen if he tried. There's also the possibility that he thinks reaching out will disrupt your happiness. If he believes that you are in a better place without him, he may see himself as an unwelcome presence in your life. He might think, she looks happy now. What if contacting her only makes things harder for her? Even if he wants to talk to you, he may convince himself that the right thing to do is to stay away and let you continue on your path. In some situations, he may have sought advice from friends or family members who told him to leave you alone. People around him might have said, she's doing fine. Don't mess things up for her, or if she wanted to talk to you, she would have. When someone is already doubting themselves, outside opinions can reinforce their fears. Even if deep down he still wants to reach out, the voices around him might be telling him that it's a bad idea. His own guilt or regrets may also play a role. If things ended on bad terms, he may believe that he doesn't deserve to contact you. He might assume that you're better off without him, especially if he hurt you in some way. Even if he wants to make amends, the fear that you won't forgive him, or that you won't even respond, can be enough to keep him from trying. Ultimately, when a man thinks you've moved on, he builds a mental barrier that keeps him from reaching out. It doesn't necessarily mean he has stopped caring, or that he has moved on himself. In many cases, he may still have deep feelings for you, but is too afraid to act on them. He might be battling an internal war, torn between wanting to reach out and fearing that it's too late. If you still care about him and want to reconnect, the reality is that he may never make the first move unless he gets some kind of sign from you. Whether that's a simple message, a subtle like on social media, or a mutual friend mentioning your name, sometimes it takes a small spark to break through the wall he has built. But if he remains silent despite his feelings, it's worth asking yourself whether you truly want someone who lets fear hold them back from what they want. Sometimes the person who is willing to reach out, despite their doubts, is the one who values the connection the most.